Welcome everyone to the latest in our webinar series. This evening I'm joined by Anna Miller and Alex Bragg, two of Dengi's supported riders. I will introduce them properly in just a few minutes, but first I'd like to share with you the outline for this evening. Anna and Alex are going to talk to us about some of their horses, taking us from the advanced and working our way back to youngsters. And it's a great opportunity to hear more about how they approach training their horses, and we'll cover some feeding as part of that discussion as well. There will be a Q&A session with Anna and Alex, time permitting, at the end, and my Dengi colleagues Tracy and Claire, who you may have met already if you joined us for one of the previous webinars, they will be behind the scenes answering any questions. So if any of the discussions prompt a query about feeding, then do feel free to pop it in the Q&A box and they will help you. Just a note to say that anything that goes into the Q&A we can actually access after the webinar. So if there's any questions we don't get to tonight, then we can follow up in the coming days. If you pop it in the chat, we don't get to access that after this evening. So do try and use the Q&A function if you can. The evening is being recorded, so it will be available for you to view again at your leisure, and information about that will come out in the next day or so. So let me introduce our guests this evening. We have Anna Miller, who is an advanced dressage rider competing at Small Tour. She's based in Surrey and provides training and competition livery, as well as competing for a few select owners. She regularly runs pole work sessions, and as an ex-eventer loves to get dressage horses' minds thinking with a bit of jumping. Anna provides both able-bodied and para coaching, training Sophie Christensen CBE and riding her horses as well to keep them fit, happy and healthy, which is an area I hope we will have time to cover later too. Anna's website refers to the calm, fun and empathetic approach she has, and I can certainly vouch for that, having visited the yard last summer. You can certainly tell a lot when you walk onto a yard and see how happy both the horses and the humans are. So also joining Anna is Alex Bragg. And I think the fact that Alex's website and social media refer to Team Bragg is very telling. Any equestrian activity is a team effort, and arguably none more so than eventing. Growing up with horses, it was inevitable that Alex would have a career within the equestrian world, enjoying success as a child in pony club mounted games before concentrating on show jumping. Alex then took a break from riding at the age of 16, but continued working with horses and began his training to become a registered farrier. Again, I'm hoping we'll have time to sort of cover some of the importance of good farriery even as well later on. It's difficult to believe that Alex only took riding up again when his wife became pregnant with their first daughter in 2004. And I think it's fair to say that both he and Simone have worked incredibly hard to achieve everything they have. Today, somehow he manages to balance being a farrier and a successful event rider. And with 3 daughters, I'm not sure how he does it. But thank you both for joining us. We're extremely grateful, and it's an absolute treat to have this opportunity to talk to you about your horses and the approaches to training them. So I'm just going to see if I can change my view, because I can't actually see you at the moment. So bear with me a second. There we go. Right, I'm going to share the screen again. So if you're there, yes, perfect. Let me just move on. So first of all, Anna, we're going to start with you, if that's okay, and one of your horses. And basically, I think it's fair to say, or am I allowed to refer to him as the old goat, because that's what you've called him on your website. But what is it about Adonis B that has earned him this nickname? And whilst you're talking about that, I will share the presentation. Bear with me.
So Aris, as he is known at home, is yes, referred to as the old goat, which he is a bit of a monster, and I think I can't remember if he's going to be 16 or 17 this year. He's working at Grand Prix at home, but I still have days where I just can't even get around the outside of the arena. Less so nowadays, but I can't, I can't totally trust him. He's the spookiest horse I've ever ridden, and he makes everything else that I ride feel really quite easy. But he has got phenomenal talent, and he's taught me so much, mostly patience and perseverance. But he's brilliant, and he's brilliant fun, and he's I always say don't tell my husband, but he is the love of my life. Yeah, we also, on a good day, apparently goat stands for the greatest of all time. So it sort of depends on the day how that nickname works. But yeah, he is a character, that's for sure.
Perfect. And so just tell us a little bit about, so with an advanced horse, because we're going to start with the advanced and then sort of work our way back to the novices and the youngsters. But how much sort of time would you spend schooling and training in a typical week when they're at this level?
Well, if I could ride Aris 8 days a week, I would. Just to try and keep his mind on track. As he gets older, I have to be careful with his body. So sort of as we were getting to the more advanced level, I would probably be schooling him 4 days a week. But now that he really knows that job, I try to only school him 3 days a week so that we don't have kind of too much wear and tear. He does a lot of hacking as well. Okay. Just to try and alleviate the spooking, so we're not in the arena all the time. Loads of hill work, pole work. He has zero talent for jumping, but we do it anyway. Well, I say jumping in a fashion.
There's some poles involved, basically.
Yeah, it's about 6 inches off the floor.
That's high enough for me.
Every time we get them out, it's like he's never seen them before. But I figure if he can cope with that, then the whiteboards aren't quite as terrifying. So yeah, he's not really terrified. I think it's kind of learnt behaviour that manifests itself as spooking. Yeah.
And have you had him all the way through his career competitively?
No, so I rode him for his owner, Melissa Smith, as I think he was 4, rising 5. He'd just been cut, and I was eventing at the time, and she said, I need a brave person to come and ride this mad horse that I've bought. And so I very much attribute my change to dressage to Melissa and Aris, really. I then had a career break, a horse break, and stopped doing horses full time, went and worked in London, had a child. And some years later, Aris sort of came back on the scene, and Melissa said, you can have him to ride. I don't know what to do with him. He's still mad. And here we are.
And so do you think the way you've sort of managed him and sort of fed him has had have you been able to modify his behavior?
Yeah, so he's always been a very difficult horse to feed. He doesn't love food. So he has 4 feeds a day usually, of which he probably eats half of each meal. He's horribly expensive to feed because he's so wasteful and fussy. But he's done really well on the performance fibre, because I think it's just really tasty, more palatable than some of the coarser fibres, and that seems to have really been a game changer for us. And I think feeding him fibre, he's 90% on a fibre diet. He has a little bit of grass cubes as well, which we soak a bit just to add interest, really. But I have to be careful I don't give him too much of that, because it's sugary sweet, and don't want to make him whizzy, any whizzier than he already is.
Well, and it's interesting because you raised the point, we use things like grass pellets to tempt them because they have that natural sweetness. But even though we would think of them as a natural sort of fibre source, they are actually quite high in sugar. So again, just because it's fibre doesn't mean to say it's low sugar, but equally it does tend to tempt them to eat things. So it's interesting that you can use certain amounts and maybe not.
I'm supposed to be going to a show on Saturday, and I've just said to my team, please can he literally have like grass nut water for the few days before the show, just because he's so jolly at the moment, and just to see if that will temper him down a little bit. But in the summer he tends to be, even though the grass is probably better than in the grass in the field, in the spring and summer, he actually is better for eating more directly from the field. We also have him out at night as well, all year round, to try and chill him out. But the fibre-based diet has changed him, and he has, for the first time in his life, looked bulky, and like an advanced horse.
Yeah, I mean, that was going to be my next question, really, because often with these sharp horses, and I think we'll come to Alex's in a minute, in terms of trying to keep the weight and condition on for a relatively hard level of work, but also, not blowing the minds and having them too hot. It's finding that balance, because it's nearly always the hot ones that are the poorer doers. So you think he's actually filled out on a fibre diet?
I do. Claire can attest to that, because when she came out last time, we were jumping around the yard saying, Aris is the heaviest he's ever been, which is not, we don't want that with all of them, but with him it's like a goal. How fat can we get Aris?
without having an impact on his behaviour as well.
So he's doing well at the minute.
Excellent. I'm going to be brave and see if I can make the video work, so bear with us, and anyone out there. I'm just going to have to stop the share and try and share another link, because it's quite nice to see him in action. It was a bit jumpy earlier, but we'll see if we can get him, because seeing a horse like this work, I'm hoping. Let me just bring that up. Are you seeing that, Anna?
Yes. Yep, okay. That's working.
There we go. So this is him in all his glory, and again looking really well, isn't it? And
I would say he's looking beefier than that now, actually.
Right, which is great, isn't it? If that's what you're aiming for, trying to get.
It is. Well, I think they sort of need to look like bodybuilders, the dressage horses at this level. He's got to have that long-lasting energy. Not that that's ever really a problem, but sorry, I was just going to say, what is his breeding as well? Because it's an interesting area with warm bloods that tend to be good doers, and often carry a lot of fat, and then carrying that extra weight, what damage it can potentially do to joints and their sort of longevity of their career. But obviously with a lighter horse, you're trying to bulk him up. I was just curious what his breeding was. He's by a stallion called United, who's by Crack C, who is Jazz, I think, as well. I can't remember. He's I can't remember the mother line, actually, which is terrible, isn't it? I should have looked it up.
A trick question, sorry.
No, that's all right. But they are notorious. The Crack C's are notoriously whizzy.
Right. Okay.
And but equally have some fantastic horses out there.
Yes, and in terms of, so just sort of on the training side and things, I guess, is he the sort of horse you have to sort of ask and sort of cajole and approach softly? It's not something I imagine you can dictate to or tell this how we're doing things.
No, not really. He's desperate to do it. He would love to make dressage an extreme sport. He thinks it's brilliant fun, and he never gets bored. I had an accident in September and couldn't ride for a little bit, and my head girl Nikki was hacking him for me, and he literally towed her to the arena. He really wants to do it, but he just likes to make it more exciting than it should be sometimes. It's always about chilling him out and doing enough that I'm not wearing him out, but not so little that I don't have it enough control.
Yeah. And what sort of in terms of sort of physios and maintaining an older horse established at this level, how often would he have sort of physios? Or
he has quite a lot of physio. We have physio probably every 6 to 8 weeks. He would have physio before and after a show as well, I would say, depending on what we're what we've got coming up. But anything important, I would definitely get him seen a couple of times before he was going. And because he likes to, because I like to have him living out as well, if we have to go to stay away shows, he has to obviously be in for a few days at a time, and I do feel that his body doesn't lend itself to that, so he would then have physio again afterwards.
Excellent. And is he the sort of horse that you would give a period off in the year and sort of turn him away for a complete break, or do you try and keep him active doing so? Obviously you're
he tends to have a few sorry, I'm just looking at my pirouette going He tends to have a few quiet weeks, like over Christmas he would have a bit of downtime, and I tend to give him periods where he'd just be hacking rather than totally off. But having said that, he's a funny old thing, because he would never be backy or naughty to get on. You could give him a month off and he wouldn't mind. So he's very established in that sense, and he doesn't forget anything. So he can have time off, but I tend not to, for his mind more than anything else.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's fascinating seeing him there, and with a great big crowd, because this was a demonstration day that you kindly did for us, and he doesn't seem phased by a whole rows of people watching him at all.
Weirdly, he was brilliant with the people and kept speaking in the top corner at H there, where there was nothing,
Yes. It is interesting how they are so quirky, isn't it?
Yeah.
And with a horse at this level, I mean, what are the sort of most common mistakes or errors or things that you see people sort of perhaps going awry with this sort of level of training?
Well, you can see there just on those changes that I was doing, it's as they're sort of coming to the level, often it's straightness that's an issue, I would say. And for kind of amateur riders, stepping up from that advanced medium to PSG, well, anybody stepping up from to that level, it's quite a big leap, from doing it like a single change, just putting them into a line. And I think we forget, because they become a bit like tricks, the sort of importance of the basics, really. It's straightness is always something I'm saying to everybody that I coach, from grassroots up to the top level. It's easy to forget the detail. It's something that my coach still says to me too. Standards. And that's I think something that you can't forget as you go up.
Okay, brilliant. Anything else you want to share about? I'm going to give him his proper name, Adonis.
Well, he is
not the old goat.
I don't think so. I think we've covered everything. I'm hoping that we might do an international later on in the year. That's our goal for him. But yeah, it'll be my first show for quite a while this weekend. Because, as I say, I've been off and I was meant to be in Tokyo with Sophie, so we was a big push last year for focusing on that. So he's going to be back to being kingpin again, and focus will be back on him now. Brilliant.
Well, thank you very much for insights into that, and we're going to move to Alex's first candidate now. I'm just going to refer to my notes, Alex, because she looks like a pocket rocket to me a little bit, but she's called Diva for short, and I don't know, somehow it seems like it might be an appropriate name for her, but you can perhaps elaborate on her character and her background, if you don't mind starting with that, please.
Yeah, sure. No, definitely. Whether they knew at the time that they'd appropriately named her, I'm not sure, but certainly is a bit of a princess, and she's a beautiful looking horse, and she knows all of it. She's a sort of typical dominant mare. She builds a relationship with people she likes, and she really lets people know if she doesn't like them, and she doesn't want them in her space. But she came to us. I actually bought her out of Ireland. She was rising 6, and she'd been backed, but that was it. But she looked beautiful, so I thought, I was over there, had a couple of horses, and I thought, I'm going to have her just because she looks stunning. Got back and then realized why they'd not continued with the work was probably because she was very, very sharp, like really sharp. I couldn't even get her down the other half, the end of the arena when she first came. So we produced her really slowly. I took her show jumping for the winter when she was 6, and she didn't actually do her first event until the summer when she was 7. She kind of needed to decide that she wanted to go cross country, and she wanted to do the job. And then when she wanted to do it, she was very enthusiastic. So I've kind of had to work with her temperament a little bit. in how fast we've moved with her. But she did her first advanced actually when she was 9, coming 10, I think. So by the time she actually got into the sport, she soon caught up. Her talent started to come through, so there was no need to put the pressure on her when she was younger. And now she's done several sort of 4-stars, and she's actually going to be aimed at Le Moulin 5-star this year. The sort of dressage and show jumping is on a surface, which would really suit her. She's an exceptional jumper, and she's now amazing at cross country and very, very fast. And it's hard to think that she would be backing off the water half a field away when we first started eventing her. Now she's really got the bit between her teeth, and she's amazing. She's flying.
Yeah, and she literally looks like she's that sort of rocket. I imagine she's forward thinking all the time. But how have you sort of managed her diet wise then, in terms of feeding and all that sort of thing, for given her temperament?
So, going back to that sort of temperament side, which is something that we all have to be aware of. Listening to Anna was really interesting, because when they're very sort of hot, sharp and sensitive, they're not just sensitive to work, but they can be sensitive to other things, and that can bring on stress related issues, say like tying up, or they don't put condition on because they're anxious all the time. So the first port of call for us is to have a real good baseline, and this is where we use Alpha A oil, which the oil content is great. It's slow release energy. You can pump really as much oil into most horses as you like for that slow release energy, great condition. And then the chaff, the Alpha A, is great because it just lines the sort of top layer of stomach acid, which can help prevent those sort of ulcery sort of issues that you can get, which especially is common with horses which suffer with stress or are anxious or are very sensitive. So that's our baseline, and then she's on that and has a balancer. And to be honest, when she was younger, she competed off of Alpha A oil and a balancer for a long time with her electrolytes, and we do add an extra oil as well. But and now she has a little bit of food to supplement that when she's competing, obviously hard and galloping hard, just for that little bit more energy. But we really try and keep the condition on them with grass, with the sort of fiber, and sometimes we might add soya. The horse, she's quite happy to eat soya, and that can put condition on. And it's funny that you would imagine that when they're coming to competitions, you see these horses looking ultra fit and they're being fed less when they're leading up to a big advanced competition. But actually they're galloping the weight off themselves. So you're actually desperately trying to keep the condition on them. A question that's probably going to come, I'm going to answer it now, but what's one of the biggest mistakes there with feeding is people don't realize that when you do a 3-day event, you also have to show jump on the final day. And if your horse is run up so much and he's got no reserves in the tank, then actually it's going to be as flat as a pancake on the Sunday, and you're not going to be able to get any spring into him or her to actually perform on the Sunday. So it's really important to have that balance, and you will not keep the condition on them if they're not sort of healthy and happy in their diet and their digestive system. And this is where the Alpha A is so great as that baseline. And actually, when we go to a competition and say we may have traveled, our horses always travel with hay, but 30 or 40 minutes before we're going to get on them to warm up for the dressage or something, they might have a little bit of Alpha A oil just wetted down or something, just to line the top of their stomachs, just especially early on in the season when they can be a little bit flighty. You don't want them to then sort of get sensitive and almost show those ulcery symptoms and get nappy against the leg or anything. So we found that really helps to reduce that.
Definitely. And yeah, I mean, there's so many things there that you've raised which are really interesting. I mean, the oil is, again, obviously a slow release energy to complement the alfalfa and gives you that stamina. And people don't realize just how much energy those two combined can have. You know, it's equivalent to a competition mix. Okay, it's not the starch, but you have got some energy there, and it will fuel an animal working up to a really quite high level. So yes, obviously when you reach the elite levels and they've got to gallop and recover, you might look for other things, but it's amazing how far you can get on just effectively fibre and oil. So that's really sort of interesting. And do you turn her out a lot as well, to sort of mentally and
yes,
from a diet perspective?
Yeah, we do. All of our horses, this time of year is really difficult because it's wet. We have quite a number of horses, so we don't have enough ground that we can just decide to trash it. But they've just started going out this week, so it's been a bit drier, which is really nice. And our preference would be to turn them out overnight, the same as Anna, really. It works well. They go out overnight, they tend to be quieter, so they run around less, so less risk of injury, which is always the scary bit about letting them loose. Horses are always safer when we're in control.
Yes.
When we're not in control, it's like, oh my God. And they just seem to just want to give you a vet's bill after vet's bill. But yeah, she would go out overnight, the same routine as all of our horses. And then they come in, they have their breakfast feed, and then they all stay in because they're worked. They all tend to sleep after they're worked in the afternoon. The yard's really calm and really laid back and chilled. And then they all get ferried back out to the fields after they've had their sort of supper. And that really manages, it keeps them really happy. The routine is great. And again, it's just a little bit more natural, and trying to keep things, we mustn't forget, although we turn them into sort of athletes, that they are horses, and we must remember their horses. Well, I think we should remember their horses and try and sort of act into the habits that they would usually sort of have. Turnout's really important. And yeah, just reiterating your sort of point with fiber and oil, that's also with a stressful horse like her that might have symptoms of tying up because of stress. You know, it's really important to keep a low starch diet. She needs the energy, so that's why we would go high oil rather than starch for the energy, because you don't want to be pumping starch into a horse that might tie up. So that's something is why we feed her the way that we do as well.
Yeah, and I think the other benefit of being able to graze for so long, even if they're browsing relatively small amounts overnight, it's just that trickle feeding, as you say. It's exactly how their digestive systems function best. And you know, we're great advocates for healthy horse, and then everything goes from there. You know, you've got to be healthy to train, and if you're losing time because they've got ulcers or you know, some other problem tying up, whatever it might be, then that compromises your whole preparation because you've lost the training time. And there's lots of examples in human sport where, you know, athletes have amazingly seemingly come from nowhere to win gold medals. I often reference Kelly Holmes, but if you read her sort of, I suppose the secret to her success, when was it 2008 she got 2 gold medals, she talks about it was the first time in her entire career where she had an uninterrupted preparation for a major event. And you know, same applies to horses, doesn't it? If we lose crucial preparation time, we miss, I guess in eventing you miss a key event because of an injury or an ulcer problem or a tying up, you know, your whole plan, 4-year cycle in the case of a major event, it goes out the window, doesn't it? So being healthy to train is so important for competitive success, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sometimes the difference between maybe the approach of more professional athletes rather than an amateur, where you are striving for consistency, and that is exactly what you're saying, consistency in your training, so you can have a more reliable performance when you get to a competition, rather than just hitting and hoping, you know, saving your best for the day. It's really about, you know, trying to sort of put the odds in your favor, so you know that the horse is capable of this, your training should produce this, and sort of minimizing the window of what a bad day is and a good day is, and that starts by the beginning of the day on the yard right to the end, everything that happens on the yard with that horse, its routine, its feeding, its training, all contributes to that. So yeah, consistency is key, and it's proven, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And in terms of, obviously we've talked about it being a team effort, but how often would she have physio or an advanced horse at her level be sort of having physio and other sort of treatments and things to keep her sound and fit and healthy?
So it's physio is all relative really to the stage of work that they're in. So they're all coming back into work and starting to jump a bit now. So the physio through sort of December and January would be seeing all of the horses and getting just getting our hands on them and all that sort of stuff, and seeing where they are, and we get the feedback from that. And as the horses are doing more work, especially after they've done a competition, they would definitely be seeing the physio after that, because they could be sore in their shoulders. You're not going to, everyone who goes and runs a marathon is going to have sore legs, and they're going to recover quicker if you give them help. And it's exactly the same with the horses. So they could be seen once a month, they could be seen twice leading up to a show, and through a 3-day, the horses would be treated every single day by a physio in some way. That it might not be quite so in-depth treatment. It might be just a stretch off and a soft massage, but they get much better treatment than we do as riders. I'll lay that out there.
Sure. I think they've got better diets mostly as well, actually, but present company accepted, I'm sure.
The horses knew that there was red wine out there. They'd be sure of it. But yeah, you've got to work so tightly with your physios, your farrier. You must have an amazing farrier. He must be amazing, of course. And your vets, all of those sort of therapy, veterinary treatments. It's hard to put a schedule on them, because if the horses need them, they need them, and you can't cut corners if you want to get the best from them.
Very true. And can I ask, I should have asked Anna actually, but do you tend to use hay or haylage as part of the ration?
So for us, we moved off of haylage probably 4 or 5 years ago. Mainly the haylage was great because it doesn't matter whether it was summer or winter. You just sort of open the bag and feed it. And if you have a slightly dusty bale of hay and you think, oh, I might just soak that, if it's in the middle of the winter and you've got a yard of 20 horses, that's really difficult time and freezing cold on your hands. The other thing that we noticed with the haylage was when we were testing it, depending on what haylage you have, sometimes the protein levels were varying a little bit. So that makes it very difficult to keep the consistent feeding pattern. So then we moved on to hay, and now we have good hay, but we steam all of our hay. So we have a really consistent, again, baseline forage for them before we then apply the sort of hard food. And then, yeah, again, it's sort of the minimizing that window of any difference. So we're going to get the same from the horses. And hopefully, if you need to change their diet, you can change it on the hard feed, which is very controllable, because we feed generally ad lib like forage hay to the horses. And if that protein level was changing quite a lot, you then have to try and compensate with your hard feed. It's just really difficult. So hay was steamed hay. Really long answer for hay or haylage, wasn't it? Sorry about that.
Well, it is interesting because I think, from a respiratory and hygienic quality, we've all gone in historically for haylage, but we use the term a bit more now, wrapped hay, because some of them were getting so much more sort of dry before being baled that they really were a wrapped hay. So they were nearly, certainly more than 70% dry matter. So you're not actually getting very much fermentation. They're not that stable, but then the occasional bale will come out very wet. So it's really, sort of disrupting the amount of dry matter the horse is actually consuming. And, that has, like you say, a repercussion in terms of nutritional value, but dry matter intake. So hay would inherently be more stable, because you have to dry it to 84, whatever, plus 80% to get it dried. And then if you can steam it to solve the respiratory and sort of hygienic issues, then it's interesting, that you found it actually a much more consistent basis to rations. And I suspect if people can use these commercially available steamers now, it's a lot more practical and actually a lot more effective than steaming used to be. And it'll be interesting to see if the shift towards that as a forage continues, really. So no, really interesting. Anna, what do you use? Is it hay or haylage?
We use both, and it really depends on the horse. So Aris would be eating 90% haylage, I would say, but that's partly because he's just so fussy. Yeah. But I tried to, we've got I think 12 horses in at the moment, and they're all catered for as individuals, so some of them can't tolerate having haylage, it just goes through them too quickly, so they would all have hay. But again, it's kind of, depending on their nutritional needs, their weight. I found sometimes the haylage is better for weight gain, but I'm really lucky we have a really super supplier who it's been very, very consistent. But we have very good quality hay and haylage, and same as Alex, we quite often would be soaking or steaming the hay. We don't tend to feed too much dry hay to avoid coughing.
Yeah, lovely. Right, well, unless there's anything else you want to tell us about Diva, Alex, I think we'll probably move on.
Yeah, no, move on.
Okay.
Move on through.
Brilliant. We've got Hiawatha up next, if I can make there we go. So Anna, this is you've got
sorry, I've got a small person just interesting. Excuse me, 1 minute. Alex, would you mind just talking for a second?
This
no
is
worries.
A lovely, active, coloured stallion. Oh no, I was trying to cover for you.
You're covering for Anna.
But I'm just picking up there. It's got the most wonderful numner on.
Exactly. Should we go to your? I'm hoping that
we can go to Eddie.
There we go. Here comes Eddie, otherwise known as our Dio Premier. Yeah. So he's obviously a little bit bigger, I think, in scope and range from what I can see on the photo.
He's actually probably similar height, really.
Okay.
Slightly different build. He's more sort of an Irish type, whereas Diva is sort of continental, cross sort of thoroughbred and stuff. Eddie's a little bit younger. Eddie went to Blenheim and did the 8 and 9-year-old class last year, and he also went to Le Lyon the previous year as the 7-year-old. Actually did really well there, jumped double clear, ended up 4th, which was great. So he's a real star for the future, and we're hoping he'll do some 4-star long competitions this year, and we'll see what happens in the autumn.
Now, from what I recall, he's quite a laid-back character and very sort of much more chilled than obviously Diva. So how have you sort of adjusted your feeding regime for him to meet his needs?
Yeah, so we never have to worry about him being stressed in the stable. I've just got to pick the right time to ride him in between him snoring and sleeping and burying his head in the banks of the bed. He's a real teenage lad. You could imagine all of his sort of pants and socks on the floor, and he's crawled and hidden in his sort of man cave somewhere. But he's such a lovely tempered horse, and he comes out, his attitude's great. He does get very excited for the jumping. And this is something you have to balance up in the fact, do we want a bit more spark for the dressage or something, but then he could bubble over for the jumping. And actually, if we gave him too much more sort of energy via his feed, would it just make him more spooky and jumpy and actually more tense? So we often work for the sort of stamina, the endurance coming from them being fitter, rather than, people just saying, I'm stepping up a level, I must feed it more starch or more this or more oats or something. I mean, that's the craziest approach ever in the world, in my opinion, because you're just going to change the horse's temperament actually, if a horse is running on adrenaline, and which it will do if you feed it too much and it's too excited, its probably endurance will reduce because it will burn its energy out quicker. So we just really work on, the diet of our horses is so simple and easy. I find that's much easier to kind of accommodate any changes you need. But again, he's on very similar to Diva, but he would have a little bit more additive from, we would feed a horse care 10 from Red Mills, which is great to add in. It's fairly low in starch, but gives him the extra energy that he might need, to make sure we can get him out of bed in the morning and to work. But yeah, that's about it. It's nice, and he's nice and straightforward in that respect. He doesn't seem to suffer with any sort of ulcers or anything. I mean, he's so laid back. I don't think he'd have any stress related issues whatsoever. But being young and immature, as he stepped up the grades, we had to keep an eye on him, because he looks very fit in these photos, but these are this one is from Leon, and this is from like the national championships. I think the cross country one. He's quite fit there. In the winter he would have been really round. He would have been a right fatty when he was sort of 5 or 6. And it's not until they start galloping a lot and doing the top, they really lean up into these, these sort of great athletes. But again, it's really important to make sure in their sort of downtime, you pack the calories on a little bit, use the oil, make sure they get loads of fiber, because they need to recover and they need to build muscle. And you can't build muscle if you've got nothing there. Going to Anna saying she wants hers to have the chunk. He's got to look like a bodybuilder. They're doing such strong exercises. They really need all that power, but they only get that power if they can draw it from somewhere. We need a lot of power in our horses, but we can't have, they're not fat when they run at the big competitions, but we don't keep them looking like this all year round. You'd be unhealthy, because their immune systems would drop. They just wouldn't have enough sort of condition on them to fight off everything else. So it's important to really manage, that feed and their condition as to what you want to achieve at what point in their schedule.
And so in terms of his sort of, if there is such a thing as a typical week, in terms of fitness and training, how much would you spend sort of schooling sessions, and how much would you do some fast work with him? Or does it change, obviously, because he's a bit more laid back? Are you going to do a bit more fast work to get him thinking forward a bit more? Or
yeah, I think with a horse like him, as soon as you can, I'd try and get him out of the arena and work him in the field. So he might not necessarily be doing fast work, but we'd go and canter around the fields and stuff, and then incorporate some schooling, and then have a bit more of a hack and change the work a little bit like that, so it stays a bit more interesting for him. But they have to be doing a couple of days of dressage training, flat work training, a day of pole work. They'd be jumping once or twice a week, and then when they're starting to get fit for the competitions at his level, they would be galloping at least once a week. When they're getting ready for a 4 or 5 star long format, in that last sort of 8 to 10 weeks, they'd be doing fast work every sort of 4 to 5 days. So if you would think about it, three times a fortnight, if you like, they'd be doing fast work. And then in the sort of 10 days leading up to the big show, we wouldn't do any fast work. We taper it down and do more stretching exercises, because as the horse gets fitter, the muscles get tighter, and you don't need to tense. So then you have to stretch them off. So then you taper the cantering and increase the sort of working physio, I call it, while you're riding them, so their bodies feel the best they can for the competition. But yeah.
Do you have a sort of an all-weather track you can go to gallop and do fast work, or how do you fit that in?
Yeah, so we don't, that's the only sort of facility we don't have like on site. We're very level where we are. So we have a gallops, which is 15 minutes from us, which is really good. It's on quite a steep hill. And I've changed the way I use that gallop over the last few years. I found as you get more experienced, more knowledgeable, put a bit of science behind your training, we're looking at keeping the heart rate up and not necessarily just totally pushing the horse to fatigue, but actually pushing the horse enough that it makes progress. And as we're coming back down the gallops, keeping the heart rate up as much as we can, and then pushing the horse up the gallops. So I only actually use 3/4 of the gallops, because I know I can turn around, walk for like a minute and a half, and then I'm not on such an incline, I can't trot then. And then I'll trot to the bottom, turn and go, to keep the heart rate up and the blood circulating, and find that the horse is, it's much safer to gallop them on a hill, because you have to go slower to get the heart rate up. There's loads of science, like every degree you go, you raise the incline. By going the same pace in the canter, you'll increase the heart rate by 6 beats a minute. So if you only have to canter at 500 meters a minute, which is like a novice pace, just like a working canter, the heart rate would be 140 beats a minute. You only have to raise the incline by 8 to 10 degrees, and then suddenly you're hitting that 200 beats a minute, which is where the horse needs to be fit without going any faster. Which then reduces the risk of tendon injuries, tissue injuries, and you can get them just as fit, and hopefully increase their sort of careers, the time of their careers like that.
Yes, definitely. That's really really interesting. Anything else about Eddie that you want to share, or we might just go back?
I think he's gone to sleep now, so
is he tucked up?
Can move on to the beautiful coloured stallion.
Yeah, we'll go. Now I'm just going to press the button the right way. Here we go.
Sorry about that, Katie. We had
not at all.
Never worked with children and animals.
And the two in one evening. Hey?
Yeah.
No, it's absolutely fine. We're just extremely grateful you're both giving up your family time evenings to and sorry, depriving your daughter of her night tuck up. But anyway, tell us about Bo as we would know him.
So Bo is a 7-year-old coloured stallion, bred on one side for jumping and the other for dressage. He is just an absolute dream, such a lovely horse. I'm not riding him at the moment. He has gone home to his mummy, to his owner. He's had a little tweak, so he is in the field, living it up and loving life, I think. He is the most relaxed stallion I've ever met on the ground. Barely any coltish behavior at all. Totally sweet. I mean, my daughter could come and grim him and pat him and hang out with him in the stable, not bitey, not naughty, just lovely. But that was quite juxtaposed with his way of going when you ride him. He's very sharp and very quick-minded, in the best way, really wanting to work, but such an over-trier. That again, he's one that kind of could worry weight off, get a little bit stressy, I suppose, because he was in tire. He was just a little bit cautious of his own body, overprotective of himself, terrified in the warm-up of other horses, but the more I did with him, the more reliable he became, and with him it was really important to have a real relationship with one rider. He's not one that you could sort of put lots of people on and let your grooms ride, or or you have a go and learn. Definitely not. He's he was very much only I would ride him.
Is that a trait, do you think, of stallions generally, or is it just particular characters? I was going to ask Alex about his. in a minute, because he's got a
Well,
stat.
I would say just particularly him, but often stallions, in my experience, seem to be one way or the other. They're either really whizzy or really lazy. And I think perhaps the ones that are a little bit quieter, that maybe it's not so important to have that relationship. But he also he was just anxious, and so he had he had frightened a few people, I think, and in the process frightened himself. So he just had to be a little bit careful. But because he was, when I first started riding him, he was difficult to keep fat. So, and also you'd go to a show and he'd worry some weight off. And so I used to feed him stud cubes and conditioning cubes and pump him full of all sorts of things. And then, rather like Alex was saying, then he'd be fueled by anxiety. So he's an Alpha A candidate with oil. And that really, really worked for him. We did sometimes put some extra bits in to try and keep him a bit fatter at times, but that was the thing that kept him most level-headed, for sure.
And with it, is he a stallion that would have done any sort of stud work as well, or is he just
not really? It's a bit rubbish. He's no, I mean, he, to be fair, the more he did, the more he started to realize he was a stallion.
I was going to say, because then it's the balance between actually their mind somewhere else and not focused on work.
But no, he's never done live covering, so he hadn't quite put two and two together. And he only really lived with one mare on our yard, and so we were able to keep them they were living at separate ends of the yard. And the way our yard is set out, we have fields in different compartments, so he'd never be near the girls. But generally he was a good boy.
Yeah. And so if you were competing him, would he sort of travel on his own and go to competitions separately?
I never traveled him with mares, but no, he has traveled with others. He's really good. Okay. Yeah.
So you can cope with that sort of interaction.
Yes. Yeah. We did have to have stallion boards in the lorry. He can't sort of be allowed to choose somebody next door to him. But no, on the whole, he was very, very good.
It's interesting that he was such a sort of Jekyll and Hyde almost, in that he's very chilled in the stable and happy.
Totally. Loads of sleeping, loads of, just really, really sweet and pretty good in the field as well.
Yeah. But like you say, maybe some bad experiences, as you say, from the riding side, and that's possibly where the anxiety might come from. I
think so, but also I think just sort of, I think he was always ridden quite well, but I think just frightened of other horses. I think a little bit institutionalized maybe in his very early life. So he hadn't, or just, I don't know. I think stallions often are just more protective of themselves.
Yeah. And
that anxiety of, particularly horses coming towards him and they're collecting was always a little bit scary. So then he'd go in the arena and be like, phew, thank God for that.
So with his training then, what sort of, how much work would he typically do in a week? And
well, most of my horses work 6 days a week. He was one that needed to do masses of hacking. We are really lucky where we are that we've got loads of hills. So because he was a bit of a sharp one, like Alex was saying, uphill quick. Down a bit. Yeah, hold the next strap and kick on. I think coming from an eventing background, that kind of cross training thing is still really part of my regime. I don't like them to get bored. He would be schooled 3 or 4 times a week maybe, but he might hack as part of that. One of those sessions might be just totally stretching. He did jump a little bit. He's quite talented at the jumping, probably the only one that I had that was actually leave the jumps up. He was very good at everything really.
Yeah. And so at the level he's working at, what are the sort of what would be his dare I say weaknesses? What has been most challenging about training him at the level he's reached?
So the changes is quite tricky with him, because he just worries so much if he gets it wrong, that he'd scoot and shoot off and whiz around and like he'd been stung by a bee. But actually once he gets something, he really gets it. And it took a long time as well for him to establish the medium trot. When I first got him, he was a novice horse, and his owner used to say, "Oh, we must have part trotter, because he's coloured." He used to trot like a beetle, and there was no medium trot. We were getting 6s for our medium trots, and then suddenly he just found a groove. My trainer kept saying to me, his mechanics are good, he'll find it, he'll get it. And he just, once the penny dropped, is brilliant. And he's had 9s for his medium trot, because he's actually suddenly really worked out how to do it, and it's become a bit of a party piece. But the changes was always the bit that made him anxious again. So every time he has to learn something new, it makes him a bit anxious, and you have to kind of, you lose a bit before you gain.
And is it something then, if it is an area that it's harder to kind of get it nailed, is it something you do more, or because he's so anxious, would you tend to just do it very occasionally so we don't?
No, you can't really shy away from it. Right. But I would do things in a different way, rather than just keep asking and making him more and more anxious. Actually with him, I did use, a lot of dressage riders don't like you to use poles to teach the horse to change, because it can make them late behind. But actually with him, it was just a case of giving him the idea that if I move, it's not, you don't need to panic. I'm going to put my leg back, and you're going to have to deal with it. And actually in the end, he will just change from your seat and your weight. We haven't quite got to that point yet, but using poles and small jumps for him were really key in just getting him to realize that actually I did really want him to change to the other leg, and he didn't need to panic about it.
And would you typically use any other sort of forms of fitness training? I mean, do you have any walkers, or do you work them from the ground, lunging and long reining and stuff like that? Do you have any?
We do lunge a bit. He would be a horse that if he'd had a bit of time off, I would always lunge him before I got on him. He also would go on the walker a little bit because he's not one that I would want to put out at night, just in case he got in with anybody else or escaped or anything like that. It probably would suit him, but we just don't have masses of ground. I just was from the safety element was slightly paranoid about that. So he did go on the walker quite a bit. Aris doesn't, because he doesn't have the best feet, so I'm always a little bit careful that he doesn't go round and around too much.
Alex will sort you out on
that. Quite. Lucky I do have a really brilliant farrier. Just in case he's watching. Lots of hacking, pole work, the walker a bit. He would be a candidate to go on the water treadmill as well. Some of us do that.
Have you got one, or do you travel
somewhere? No, sadly not. But we have a brilliant practitioner down the road who helps us with that, and she works in conjunction with our physio, and that's been quite a good tool for some of them if they've had injuries, or again the slightly portly ones that you might want to do a bit of a kind of lower strain exercise. I've talked about these two in particular, trying to get the weight on all the time, but we do have a couple that are the other way, and we found the water treadmill is quite a good way of, like Alex was saying, about keeping the heart rate up, but not putting too much strain on them. And lots of hill work where we are. We're just really lucky that you can't really hack without a hill.
I think it's brilliant that you both hack so much, because I think certainly in the dressage world it's not something that's always done, and it can be particularly difficult, certainly in this part of the world, in the southeast of England. There's the safety aspects of trying to hack out.
We did find in lockdown there's millions of dogs, but I do think it makes the horses brave, makes the anxious ones brave, makes you have a better rapport with your horse, in because you can't control all the uncontrollables.
Yes, you never know. I guess we see it on the TV most times at these 3-day events where there's somebody's loose dogs running alongside a horse, isn't it? So if you're prepared for anything, it's more likely not to end in disaster, I guess. Okay, brilliant. Alex, I think we'll move on to, actually we've probably got, who have we got? We have got Neville and Lance. Anna, so do you want to carry on talking about the novices?
So Neville and Lance are both the Black Beauty babies. Lance is he's rising 6, but I just bought him from a friend last summer. He had backed him, and then he'd had a little bit of a sort of problem with his back and didn't think he could carry on with him, so he was a bit of a lucky find, really, but he was quite green for his age. So I got him at 5, having not really ever cantered in the arena before, or but Paul, who I bought him from, had done a really lovely job. He has the best brain, had just the sweetest horse with such a brilliant attitude. He just takes everything in his stride. So he and Neville are both coming back from a 3-month winter holiday, because they were going to have one anyway, and then I fell off and broke myself. So they ended up going out 2 weeks earlier than they were meant to. But he had just done everything I asked him to do, was sort of ready to go to his first show, been to a few outings, lessons, arena hires, things like that, and was ready for a break. He's kind of ready to go out and do a novice test now, and so that'll be the plan in the next few weeks, once he doesn't look so much like a teddy bear.
And just to explain, if anyone's wondering, that is one of the mobile weigh bridges that yes,
don't keep a small patch of grass in the middle of the yard.
A rare occasion where we were allowed out last year, and all the lockdown and things, and the beautiful sunshine, and that's Claire, one of the nutritionists, doing the weigh-ins. So do you find it quite helpful to keep a track of their body weights and things?
I do, and he was one that I think I'm going to have to be a bit careful with his weight, because when he arrived, he'd come all the way from Aberdeenshire, and he was a little bit on the skinny side, because he'd had 4 or 5 days to travel down to me. He was in great condition, but I think he'd been a little bit stressed by the journey, and he'd never left home, and suddenly he was, it was a long old way, and I went, oh, quick, feed him. Looks too skinny, which is slightly my tendency. And then suddenly I was like, oh, actually 2 months later, I think I better slow down with that. He's looking brilliant. And he has, even through his winter holiday, he has just been having loads of Alpha A. He's on some really good grass as well, and he's come back looking like he's lost nothing, no muscle, he looks exactly the same as when he went out. So I'm thrilled, but I think now I'm probably going to have to be a bit careful that I don't end up with a pork chop.
Yes, he might be one of the good doers in the yard.
Yeah. Whereas Neville, on the other hand, is more like the others. So he is 3, rising 4. And he's a bit of a skinny wig. I jointly own him with my dear friend Alice Reed, and he is looking like a superstar. He's by a stallion called Just Wimpoff, who is a real mover and has real natural uphill balance, but is green as a cabbage at the moment. So I hope that I'll do 4-year-old classes with him, but he is a cribber, and so he is a difficult one to feed, because he needs to eat more and crib less. He likes it, and he only really does it when he eats. So he's another one that's a candidate for being out as much as possible, to stop him from doing that. He doesn't do it when he's in the field. So.
And is he a bit of a stressy kind of individual, or laid back?
Not really. He's quite a cool customer, actually, for a horse of his age and stage. He's not bothered at all. He's just started hacking out, and I've gone straight past a giant tractor delivering haylage, on the farm where he is at the moment, and he doesn't mind about any of that stuff. I just think he probably was barned as a baby in Holland, and has picked that up, and it's difficult to stop them from doing that. But I'm a great believer that sometimes you make them more stressed by trying to force them to stop doing that than just letting it happen and trying to make them as happy as possible so they don't need to do it.
And so in terms of, obviously we've got 3 to 4-year-old and then up to sort of 5-year-old, how would their workloads differ? Would it
they don't do very much. So these two, as they come back, will just be hacking loads. Lance is a little bit further along, but they probably school twice a week, hack twice a week, lunge once. They might do a little extra school and go for a hack, or the other way round. But at the moment, Neville's petrol in the tank lasts about 5 minutes. So, you know, he goes flash round and then is exhausted, and you feel like you have to carry him. So, yeah, he'll be doing lots of hacking just to get forward thinking and enjoy life.
And are there, so at this level, sort of, would there be some really sort of key top tips in your opinion that you would give to other people for if they're thinking about buying a youngster, or they indeed have one? What are the things that the common errors you most frequently see, and your sort of top tips for competing and working at this level?
I think at this level, it's just about getting them to think forward, go forward, enjoy life, and get out there and see stuff, and not get too precious about it being really perfect. It's about getting the basics correct, and you know, just thinking about you know, getting them to enjoy the job and don't drill them too much at this point. I think for them to have as natural a life as possible and do as much as possible, these guys will jump a bit as well. Lance is reasonable at it. Neville, I haven't tried that yet. We're just trying to steer right now, so I'm not sure I could navigate fences, but yeah, I think, I mean, common mistakes I think with youngsters, especially a horse like Neville, who's so naturally balanced, would be to overdo it too quickly. And that's where a horse like Lance, actually, that's had a slightly slower start, I think is at an advantage, because a bit like Alex's horse, he's just motoring on and catching up really quickly because his body's ready for it. I think, yeah, going too quick. And I think I'd love Neville to go to the age classes, because he's a real natural, you know, he looks like a candidate for that. He's built in the right way, but if he's not ready, he won't go. I'm not going to force it. If he needs to take the time, we hope that these two horses are going to be horses for the long term, for the future. Not it's not about winning a 4-year-old class.
No. And how often you know, if things go to plan, how frequently might you compete a 4-year-old?
Probably not. Well, it's difficult to say at this point, because neither of these two have actually been to a show yet. So some of them, I find you need to go and have a bit of a run of it so that they get confident. Like the stallion that we saw earlier, he needed to do quite a bit in just quick succession just to get the idea that it wasn't a traumatic experience. And then once they've kind of got over that hump, then they probably would then do a little bit less. The 4-year-old classes all come in quite, you know, the age classes all come in quite quick succession. There's one in March, and then it's suddenly like April, May, June, and then the semi-finals in July. So yeah, I don't think we'll be ready to do the March one. I hope that we might do the ones, so that'll be a show a month. Yeah. But you know, he's barely been out of his own couple of arenas, so you know, I might be getting ahead of myself.
See how it goes, but
see how it goes. I think that's the thing, is just not to put too much pressure on yourself or the horse. Yeah. Keep an open mind.
Yeah, I think people often compete big horses too soon, especially with the warm bloods. You know, we know they mature much more slowly.
Yeah.
It's, you know, they can be 5, 6, 7 before they've properly sort of matured and everything's as it should be. Lance
shot up 2 inches, you know, in 6 months. So I think, and suddenly went bum high. And I think, you know, it's important to let them grow a little bit and back off a bit. And so these guys probably will have more holidays than the ones that are a little bit more established.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, like you've both mentioned, that your disciplines, it's a long-term career, isn't it? When you can get away with racing a 2-year-old thoroughbred, and they might have 2 or 3 sort of racing years, but then they're probably away to stud, so you haven't got that, you're not producing an animal for the longer term, so you can afford to push it a bit harder in its earlier in its life, but with something that you want 10-15 year career from, maybe it pays to be patient and wait for the body to mature, and then you can ask more of it, in
Yes.
my opinion. But excellent. Anything else to add about Neville and Lance?
No, just I try not to get too excited about them because I love
and they are both beautiful. I mean,
yeah, they are. Yeah, they're like
like
poster boys, aren't they?
Yes. And we have our field operations manager is called Lance, and he definitely isn't as handsome as
Oh,
but don't tell him.
Poor guy.
So masterclass, Mitch. So Alex, this is your novice giving this one this fence quite a bit of clearance, but am I right, he's a stallion as well?
Yeah.
Yes. So it'd be interesting to hear your take on the sort of, would you ever cover and compete and all of that sort of thing as well, but tell us a little bit about him as a character to first.
Okay, so Keith Lovelock, who owns Mitch, bred him. They had an advanced event mare that they put to a stallion called For Pleasure, which is a jumping stallion, and Mitch was originally bred to go jumping. Vicky, which is Keith's partner, convinced him that eventing was the nicer way to go, which was great because we were the benefit of that. And Mitch came to us when he was 4 years old. We just did some basics with him at that point, and actually his 5th year last year he did half a dozen events. I don't like to push them that hard as like 5-year-olds. Again, you can see how expressive he is over a jump, and he moves like that as well. And being a stallion, they have bigger shoulders, bigger necks, and if they're going that airborne over a fence, they're also landing at a much steeper angle with that much extra weight on their forehand anyway, and not being the most balanced and strong. You don't want to sort of injure them and put too much wear and tear on them too soon. So they just go out to have a bit of experience. But he's a really lovely temperament as a stallion. When we first started to travel with him, we took him in the little 2-horse lorry by himself. But now he goes on the big lorry. He'll travel on the big lorry with mares. We don't put a mare next to him. The mares will be at one end and he'll be at the other end. But yeah, he's really good with that. It does get a little bit excitable when he gets off the truck. So everyone has to pull the short straws for that, and they're hanging onto a long rope with him prancing around. Definitely sort of doing a lovely display, trying to attract as many mares as he can. But when you sit on him, he sort of gets focused. And I think that was important as well, to make sure that we had, like Anna was saying, the basics. If you haven't got the horse like fairly straight and they decide to be distracted by other things, being a gentleman myself, I know how distracting ladies can be. So you got to make sure you have some kind of way of like keeping him focused.
Have you tried blinkers, Alex, for yourself?
For myself,
yeah.
So I got married, and then my wife sorted that out straight away. No, so yeah, so that's where we are with him. He's a lovely stallion. He's got lots and lots of potential, and we're very excited.
And so what would his typical week be, sort of training wise, exercise? How much would you do with him at home?
So we, same with Anna, try and keep it as varied as we possibly can, especially in the summer. We try and get out of the arena and into the fields. We were just talking about now, although we don't tend to do sort of canter work, fast work with them, fitness work up the gallops and stuff, until they need to really prepare for the big shows. Actually, for his mind, being that stallion that they could get a bit bored. If they get bored, they're just entire, a bit like a mare. You know, if they decide to be stubborn, they can be quite stubborn. So I always think that actually stubbornness is like a negative form of kind of determination. So if you can keep them really positive thinking, then they'll be stubborn not to fail rather than stubborn not to do. So we will take him to the gallops a little bit, thinking nice and forward. And because it's uphill, he can push his way up the gallops and get stronger. And it's just something different for him. So he's likely to go to the gallops once every sort of couple of weeks, just to keep him sweet. But other than that, he hacks out. I'd probably only do 1 or 2 days flat work with him, and I'd incorporate more pole work. He would jump once a week, but more pole work, and sort of broach the sort of subject of more difficult movements or movements which could say sort of interfere with your dressage. So when you first start teaching rein-back, for example, I'd probably teach it in a pole work session or in a jump session, because if you just do it in dressage, then they get nervous about the halt because they might anticipate going backwards, or they just say, no, I don't want to go backwards. Whereas, and then you have that issue that they might sort of fight with the contact and decide to go up in front or whatever. Whereas if you're in a jump session, you can just stop and ask him for a couple of steps back, pat him, and it becomes part of an exercise rather than a movement. So when they're young, we try and do a lot of pole work because it's just more fun, really, and you're not always drilling them in a dressage saddle all the time.
Are you shying away from your dressage, really? That's what it is, isn't it?
No. I mean, I'd desperately like to, but I can't because I got to put so much work into it. As
somebody that used to like to do just get the dressage done so I could go cross country, I can empathise. I've just gone to the dark side.
I know. Well, I think a lot of us eventers probably could jump to the dark side. The amount of time we have to spend in a dressage saddle nowadays, and I think it, with Mitch being quite young, he will have his time when he will have to focus more on the dressage than the jumping, because his jumping will be so established. But at the moment, it's nice to incorporate some fun stuff into him being produced to be an all-round athlete, and then we can really focus on the dressage movements when we need to. But you can do so much dressage while you're doing pole work and while you're actually jumping. Straightness is crucial for jumping. And again, I'm sure Anna will say is crucial for the dressage. And actually, you can't hide from straightness when you're jumping, because you have to let go of the reins and the horse will just veer off one way or jump one way or the other. So it's a really good way of gauging how straight the horse is, whether he's in front of your leg or not, because you can canter down the long side in this beautiful canter, and then if you wanted to come to a fence, they can't see a stride. Well, it's because the canter was not in front of your leg. So if you put a little jump there or cavaletti there, it makes you ride the horse forward and it keeps him nice in front of the leg. It makes you ride freer in the rein because you can't pin the reins. So you can't fabricate anything. You have to do it quite naturally. So yeah, we do a lot of that with him, and and he seems to be enjoying himself. He's got his ears pricked in this photo, so he looks very happy.
Is he going to stay in Tyre?
Yes, yeah. So it's something that Keith and I sat down and discussed actually when the horse was 4 about how we were going to proceed with it. And before he came into training, so as he was sort of rising 4, he was in his 4th year. Before he came to me, he went to the stud and they took some sort of semen off him. So he has, I think, sort of 60 straws that are frozen at the moment. And the plan was never to sort of market him until he'd done something. So those are all banked. And this year Mitch is going to be turning 6 this year. So we'll push Mitch on a little bit. He'll have a busier season. And hopefully if he's as successful as we hope, then maybe they'll market some of those. But we would hope that we would maybe get him to 7 quite established in his work before he'd have to go back to stud, and then have to perform again, is the nicest way of putting it, I suppose. Because otherwise it can be quite distracting for them once they've gone, especially if they serve. you see so many stallions in the warm-up arenas being very, very difficult because they just can't concentrate. And we want to avoid that, because it's really important that he has a good career. And Keith Lovelock is absolutely brilliant like that. He really wants the best for the horse, and I'm sure, as we were saying about producing them slowly at the beginning to get the years and the benefit at the end of their careers, when the horses are actually at the top level, it would be much the same for him, I'm sure. Is once he's delivering the goods and he's at the top level, I'm sure they have plenty of horses that will want to be candidates for him, and he can then do that business without being so sort of young and full of testosterone as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting, combining those roles, isn't it? And the sort of commercial aspects as well as competitive success even too.
Yeah.
Can I just touch on the farrier side, Alex? Do you go around events looking at horses and thinking, gosh, those hooves are awful, I could do a much better job? Or do you very much compartmentalize what you your two different careers?
You can't help but, look at that part of the horse's anatomy. It's one of the first things I look at when I'm going to buy a horse. I know how important it is for the horse to have good feet, good limbs, and that's all incorporated in that. But no, I try not to. If I'm perfectly honest, I tried to go to an event and be a rider. And then I've been often at 3-day events and people are like, oh, I've got a loose shoe. Would you have a look at it, Alex? Or I don't trust this French farrier. Would you have a look at my horse's shoes? And then you do have to sort of dual roll it a little bit. But no, I do, although I can be seen on our yard sometimes for horses coming from the field and clipped a heel or something and it needs a clench doing. I'm in my jobbers, with the horse in the shoeing bay, tidying it up before I can ride it and things. It is quite funny. I think it's weird, more weird for other people to see me in the different roles than it is for me. And our team, when we have new staff come in, they find it so strange that I go in the house at 4 o'clock finishing riding, then I come back out and shoot 2 of the horses on the yard, and they're like, what are you doing? And then
you shoot all of yours.
Yeah, and now those are the only horses that I do shoe. I'm so busy with the riding that I literally just shoe the horses on the yard, and I can't give that up because I can't look at my own horses without a good enough job on their feet. So, but yeah, no, shoeing is integral. Our horses are shod once a month. Just to make sure the balance of their feet are kept well. A lot of hoof supplements are good, and they are helpful, but they will have a smaller effect on the quality of the horse's feet than good regular shoeing. On my recommendation with someone, if the shoes were getting loose and the feet were splitting, is to bring your shoeing cycle 1 week sooner. Because if the clenches don't rise, the shoe don't come loose, you won't have the movement in the shoe, which creates the sort of splitting and the cracking. So if you have a good healthy diet in the horse already, that good regular routine shoeing should be good enough to keep the horses in their feet in good condition.
And you do yours every 4 weeks?
Yeah, once a month. So yeah, it's sort of depending on the weekend competitions and stuff. It depends on sort of where they go in that. But yeah, it's every I suppose, so every sort of 5 weeks nearly, or whatever it is, their names go down in the diary, and then it's sort of worked around. So we got Badminton hopefully is going to run this year. Okay, so the horses going to Badminton, their shoeing cycles are already worked out back to now, so you can make sure the horse is shod at the appropriate time before Badminton and the appropriate time before his lead up competitions, because you don't want to be suddenly getting to in middle of April and think, oh I need to shoe him now, but it's 3 weeks till Badminton, and then I don't want to shoe him at 3 weeks, but actually I can't send him to badminton with 3 weeks old shoes. So then you're in a predicament. So you need to make sure you get that planning cycle. So that's something that I would always say to people if they have a focused competition, especially if you're going to, say, a show jumping show, big show jumping show for 4 days. The last thing you want is to be losing a shoe or your horse going lame because his feet are too long during the competition. So plan that in your diary and try and work with your farrier, because that's really helpful for you and for your farrier, so you don't have to ring up for too many emergencies, and grovel a lot to them to turn up.
Yeah, and it's brilliant advice, isn't it? Because it's the attention to detail and planning. We'll think of our fitness and when we're going to compete before a big competition, but actually even things like all your farriery and dentistry and all of those things need to be part of that planning process as well. And I know certainly from talking to various people involved with preparation for big equestrian games or Olympics or something, humans and getting their teeth done, because toothache or some kind of tooth abscess is one of the biggest things that takes an athlete out of a competition, or certainly was historically, until they actually got everyone to have a dental assessment well in advance of a big competition. So it is really, really important and useful advice. Thank you. Anna, there are some questions. So while I'm just going to stop sharing the screen, but would you just tell us a little bit from the training and what you'd look for in a horse for your sort of para coach aspect as well, because I'm guessing that has you've got to have a very safe, reliable horse, but to win these days it's intensely competitive, isn't it?
Absolutely. So I only really got involved in the kind of para world sort of must be coming up to 5 years ago, something like that. I started working with Sophie Christensen, and sort of by mistake, really. She came to me for livery and management of the horses, and I'd not long had my daughter, so I sort of didn't go to the shows with her because I didn't want to be away. And then it's evolved into a relationship where I now coach her and manage the horses. And we are currently looking for a horse for her now, because she has an excellent horse, but we think he will be getting on a bit for Paris. He was selected for Tokyo, and then we had a problem right at the last minute when we were in quarantine, which was pretty heartbreaking, pretty awful. So it's interesting listening to Alex talking about those preparations, the shoeing cycles, the dentistry for both horse and human. We were very on it with all of that stuff to make sure that we've been liaising with our own farrier and our team farrier to make sure that all happened in the right place. But yeah, so going back to finding horses, I think people think that you need something that's a dobbin. And actually, when you look at the quality of horses that we need for the top para riders, they're exactly the same horses that we would want to be riding. They do have to have exceptional temperaments. But equally, we're really, for me, I coach quite a few para riders now, and I'm looking for something to suit that individual. So it's the same as finding a horse for any client. It's about what will suit that individual and their individual needs. But often the para riders that I'm coaching don't have, say, use of their legs, or they've got limited use of their legs. So you don't want something that they have to kick and is lazy. It needs to, be forward thinking. And it's given me a real insight into how amazing horses are, that you can train them to do things in a totally different, from totally different aids that we wouldn't traditionally use. The use of the voice, use of other aids, it's made me, I think, coaching paras has made me a better rider myself, because it's made me so much more aware of my own physicality and what I'm doing, and having to train a horse specifically for somebody else is been fascinating as well. So yeah, finding those horses a bit like hen's teeth, but they do temperament first, and then they have to have, depending on the grade we're looking for me, it's always the walk has to be exceptional, and And then for the riders doing the higher grades, obviously they have to have a decent trot and canter as well, but maybe not move so massive that it's difficult for those riders to stay with the horses.
It's a fascinating area, and I imagine
they go straight to massive shows as well.
Yeah.
So it's not, they don't get nearly the build up that we have, because there's less of the shows around. So they're going straight to an international, or, after they've qualified, from just almost like a little riding club show down the road, suddenly straight to Hartbury, or they have to be really quite exceptional.
Brilliant, thank you for that. We've had a couple of questions. I think one or two of them you might have already sort of answered, but Laura has asked a question for both riders. If you could only have one supplement in your feed room, which would it be and why? And it's perfectly fine to mention anybody other than Denji. We're not going to be offended. So is there anything that you kind of swear by in your supplement, in your feed room, that you couldn't be without?
Do you want to go first, Alex, or do you want me to?
Okay, I'll go for a gut supplement. We use Protexin Acides. Again, it's all kind of balanced with the sort of dietary thing and the sort of happy, healthy guts, so working with that sort of fiber diet, and the Acides really does reduce the risk of ulcers. And you can't train a horse if he's not got the energy, and he won't have the energy if he's not getting the best out of his food. So yeah, it's a staple thing where all the horses get, whether they're 5-year-olds or competing at 5-star. And yeah, it's sort of essential, but yeah, it's really helpful.
Anna, is there anything?
We tend to feed all of our horses a vitamin and mineral supplement if they're not having any other sort of concentrate other than the Denji fiber, which, to be fair, most of mine are on some kind of, mostly fiber only, and then they have either the Denji vitamins or a balancer, and so yeah, we can't do without those. And if I'm allowed a second one, they have electrolytes as well.
Perfect. Yeah. And are there any other sort of things in your feed room or your tack room, perhaps I don't know, or grooming aids or products or whatever that you swear by? Is there anything else other than feed or that you use?
Grooming products. I discovered some years ago when I worked as a working pupil in eventing for Bryony Holloway, a product called Orvis, which is a shampoo that you can buy. You can get it online, I think, but they sell it at Horse Health. Not that I'm promoting here, but it's called Orvis. Comes in a big square tub, and it's the best thing for white. So for like the coloured stallion who loves to lie with his face in the poo, and he has a lot of white in his tail. It's amazing, and a tub will last the whole yard more than a year. It's brilliant stuff.
Excellent. That's a great top tip. Alex, anything sort of, I don't know, maybe in the farrier world that you couldn't be without? Any interesting gadget or piece of equipment?
I think in the farrier world is pretty straightforward and simple. It's like been going on for centuries, and not a lot has changed. There's lots of new stuff, acrylics and stuff, which you can use on the horse's feet, which is great. But I think for like everyday use, actually, we would use a TENS machine, which is kind of used in sort of pain relief or sort of calming, sort of soothing. And actually, horses that can sometimes be a little bit tense when they come out, or they get a little bit sore and tight, maybe in their hamstrings, we have a different sort of different ways of mapping out the TENS machine on their backs or on their rump to kind of help with that, to help them relax really before they work. And it's not expensive. So if you work with your physio and they're knowledgeable, actually, I think that can be really, really helpful. And it's nice time you can spend 20 minutes with a horse before you get on it, pop the saddle on it. And actually it's good time to have a good rapport with the horse as well before you then sit on it and really start to reap the benefits straight away, because the horse will then hopefully relax down, draw the contact a little bit, and you'll think, wow, it normally might take me half an hour riding to sort of get this, and they offer it up sometimes. So yeah, that would be something to invest in and have a bit of a play around with.
Definitely. Brilliant. That sounds interesting.
We use an equilibrium massage pad as well that sort of sounds sort of similar effects. I hadn't thought about digging out my tens machine. Haven't used that since I was a baby. I mean, probably got one in the loft.
Excellent. There was a question I think probably came in quite early on about the extra oil, what type of oil that you add to, I think it was probably Diva that we were talking about, Alex, because we put, obviously it's rapeseed oil on the alpha oil, but what do you put on the top? Was it soya you mentioned, or was that?
Yeah, no, we actually use, it's called Karen oil.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, that's the oil that, and we would add quite a lot to some of the horses' feeds. Again, you know, just getting in those calories that you need, that's slow release and things like that. So yeah, I've got to be a little bit careful. There is the occasional horse that will be sensitive to oil. So you think by feeding it a low starch diet and you're pumping the calories in because you're pumping oil in, and you get the occasional horse which is sensitive. We have another 5-star horse which is more sensitive to oil. So we fed a very low starch feed and got more excitable. So if you are seeing that behavior, you know, just really sort of like readdress what you've changed. And it was obvious what we'd done. We changed it back. He was better straight away. So what works for one doesn't work for everything, but I would say 90% of the horses, we definitely raise the calories by putting the oil, and that Karen oil is absolutely brilliant for condition and everything.
Excellent. And is there you talked about a little bit about hoof growth and things, but is there a supplement for hooves that you tend to turn to if you're going to go down that route? Someone's asked specifically. So
yeah, so obviously being a farrier, I probably have the knowledge. There's a few great sort of companies out there. We use a company called Better for Hooves. They have a feed supplement you'd add to the hard food, which is great. Most of the changes that you're going to make are going to be internal. You just want there to be better quality stuff growing, you know, which is why diet is so important again. They also do a great hoof ointment, which is like a sort of moisturizer where it controls the sort of moisture change in the feet. So as the feet swell with more moisture and then reduce when they get dry, that's why you see splitting. So it helps to sort of manage that a little bit. So we would use that as hoof oil rather than just a hoof ointment that you put on. So when the horse goes to the shows, you're almost treating their feet as well as sort of making them look all posh and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, that's what we use.
Brilliant. Just some last little some comments and feedback really. Somebody said, do you have sort of working students and interns? And if so, should they contact you through social media? I think you've inspired them. They want to come and be part of your teams. But is that generally something you both do, or do you tend to stick with your core staff?
Well, I've got a brilliant team who are all fantastic, but we do sometimes take on apprentices. I had a fantastic apprentice last year who has now gone off to work for Gareth and Rebecca Hughes. I like having apprentices, so yeah, everyone has to start somewhere, and I think there are some good schemes out there. Okay. And you know, the academic route isn't always the right one for people, so I think it's, you know, learning on the job is often better than some of the other trainees that I've had come.
Yeah, definitely horses for courses. Sorry, had to put
yeah.
Sorry, it's getting late. And then Alex, any sort of, do you take in sort of working?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really enjoying my coaching. I do limited coaching because of time, really. But yeah, I have a girl that's based with us that's a competition. She's on a competition scheme, and I really enjoy working with her. And I would say to everyone out there, enthusiasm is the thing that I would look for in any member of staff or anybody that I want to coach. So if you're enthusiastic and you want to put the effort in, then you'd be more than welcome here. But you know, you're the one that's going to make it happen for yourself. I'm just going to be there to sort of guide you. I'm not going to work miracles, but yeah, we love it. Keeps you young, you know, keeps you on your toes as well, because they start pushing you. It was funny, I was coaching the other day, and I was sort of watching the horse go around, and I was thinking, do you know what? My horse does that, and I'm telling her what to do to help it to get better. And I'm thinking, why don't I say that to myself? So I was riding today, telling myself to do exactly what I was telling her to do. So I learned from that lesson.
I'm glad it's not just me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were you saying it out loud though, Alex? Were you talking to yourself?
Yeah, well, I spend a lot of time in the arena by myself, so it's amazing. I even argue with myself. I mean, how easy is that? This is what horses does to you.
Definitely brilliant. No, I love it. And there's one comment I have to pass this on, so I think it's lovely, from Sarah or Sarah. She says, my partner says he loves the pole work. He loves putting them out for me, exclamation mark. So it just reiterates where we started. I think that the whole essence of this is teamwork, isn't it? So I am very conscious of time, so I'm going to call it a night there, but in the absence of being able to give you a massive round of applause, which we would obviously do if we were in person, I know there will be lots of thank yous coming in via the chat box. So I've thoroughly enjoyed discussing all of these horses with you, and without embarrassing you too much with my gushing, I just want to say that I think you're fantastic ambassadors for Dengie and equestrian sport generally, so thank you. And as you said, Alex, your enthusiasm and passion is what's been so evident from both of you this evening, and I know you're going to have inspired others to do go on to greater things, really. So thank you very much. We'll be sending some thank yous as we can't show our appreciation right now in person, but I'm afraid when I have to end their webinar, I'm going to cut you all off. So I just want to say thank you to everyone I know your families behind the scenes will have been putting children to bed and sorting out homework and doing all those sorts of things. So thank you to them as well for allowing you to participate this evening, and thank you to the audience, because you know, I know you'll have got a lot from this, and we appreciate you taking the time to listen. So with that, yes, the thank yous already coming in straight away. So thank you very much. Good night, everyone, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Take care.
Night night.
Bye bye. Bye.